Hello folks, it's Paul McKeever. I'm here to talk about three beefs I have with the current discussions surrounding coronavirus right now. So let's start with one. It's the double standard, and I'll use hydrochloroquine versus staying in place or social distancing as the two things that are being treated differently even though they suffer from the same problem. Hydrochloroquine, you've probably heard about. It's been vilified a lot by the left or by the media because, well, Donald Trump said a few weeks back that there seems to have been some use of it in France that looked very promising, and in fact that's true. Right away, his right-hand medical person, Mr. Fauci or Dr. Fauci, said, well, wait a minute now, there haven't been clinical trials, meaning we haven't, studied this properly with its use on Covid-19, which is the disease that results from coronavirus infection. So just to give you an idea what he meant by that, to know that something is effective, you have to know both what happens when you take the drug and what happens when you don't take the drug. In both cases, you have to have been suffering from the same ailment. So if you have 100 people that are suffering from COVID-19, maybe let's make it 200, and you give 100 of them hydrochloroquine, and you don't give hydrochloroquine to the other 100, you give them nothing, maybe just a glass of water. And then you look at the results of the two groups. You can compare them and see if hydrochloroquine had a significant effect on recovery for the group that received it as compared to the group that did not. Okay, so you got the idea of the baseline there. Well, what about sheltering in place or social distancing and etc.? We are being told we have to flatten the curve, this is going to be effective and yada, yada, yada. And it might be, but the problem is we don't know because we can compare, for example, Ontario, Canada with Sweden, and then someone will say, well, you can't really compare those two groups. Yes, Sweden did not impose social distancing and staying at home, and Ontario did, but they're very different places, very different places. People live further apart or closer together. There are more cities, there's fewer cities. They speak a different language and eat different food. They're older, they're younger, etc. The only way to do it, one might argue, within Ontario is to take the healthy population, force half of them into, staying in place or social distancing, and allowing the other half to intermingle just as they would normally. That's the only way you can know that sheltering in place has an effect, by comparing doing it versus not doing it with the same population of people. But you do not see any concern for the effectiveness of sheltering in place or social distancing. You see tons of concern when it comes to hydrochloroquine. Oh, well, we can't say it's effective because there's no baseline, and yet we are told to disregard the fact that there's no baseline when it comes to social distancing or staying at home, etc. So the very same people who say you have to discard hydrochloroquine as something that should be used to treat the COVID-19 are the very same people who say we must stay at home, and yet in both cases there is no baseline by which we could determine the effectiveness of the hydrochloroquine on the one hand or of the staying at home and social distancing on the other. There's a double standard being applied. And when there's a double standard, you have to ask yourself why. Why are they so committed to statistics when it comes to hydrochloroquine, but willing to just turn a blind eye when it comes to dramatically forcing the shutdown of an entire economy? I'd like to know. Why do statistics matter with medicines that might help, but don't matter when it comes to behaviors that might not help at all? Beef number two. You will find people who will say things like, the science is in, what do you mean? You don't care about the science, you don't care about the numbers, you're anti-science, you're all about the politics and you don't care about the science. Look, and normally these people will say that you're selfish and etc. They jump from the numbers, the science, the data, to some conclusion, okay? David Hume, he was a famous philosopher. He said that you can't derive an ought, what you should do, from an is, what the facts are. In other words, even if you know what all the facts are, there's no way the facts will tell you what you should do. And the facts themselves don't per se tell you what you should do, but there is a way to get from what the facts are to what you should do. It's beyond the scope of this video. But that's not the point. The point is that the people that I'm complaining about in this segment are those who say, because these are the facts, therefore my recommended course of action is correct. They make a leap. So for example, let's say that you know that, or you believe that indeed, sheltering in place or keeping 2 meters distance from everybody else or covering your face, etc., will indeed statistics prove, or the science is in, or the numbers say, or the doctors, or the experts, whatever it is. Let's say you know for a fact that you will save 30% more lives by engaging in these measures, okay? So those are the facts. Now the question is, do you engage in the measures? Well, that's a question of whether you ought to engage in them. Now that you know what will happen if you do, the question is, should you do it? Because there's more than just the lives to consider, the lives that'll be saved. There's the economy that you'll ruin, the people you'll put out of rent or out of their homes because they can't pay their rent, the landlords that you'll bankrupt, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's more to consider than just those who might be hurt in one way. There's all kinds of other hurt. But apart from that, what is the right course of action, even if you can take all of those facts into account, okay? The is does not in and of itself tell you what you ought to do. My beef is that there are those who assume that because, let's just assume they're right, that social distancing and et cetera works, that it's statistically significant, that it's actually going to save lives instead of just delay the death of people. The question is it right to do the social distancing? And you might say, well, of course it is. You want to save lives. That's the only thing that matters. Well, it isn't the only thing that matters, is it? I mean, for example, if you were to be able to prove, which is, I think, pretty easy, that if you took all of the cars off the road, nobody would get hit by a car, would you impose the measure of, okay, we should ban all cars? No, you wouldn't. Not if you're, half decently sane, or perhaps if you're someone who's living in the city and you're you're avowedly against cars. I can see that. There's all kinds of that contingent. But what I'm saying is, those of us who are drivers have made a decision that, yeah, accidents are going to happen. Some of us might die. Some of the people around us might die. We might end up in an unfortunate accident for one of us might kill someone. But these are all risks that the general public have accepted. Even though we know that there are thousands of people who die in collisions with automobiles every year. Okay, so we can't just say that, well, if one person is saved by this measure, then it's a good measure to do. If everyone just stays at home and destroys the economy and it saves just one life, then we will have done the right thing. By that logic, you would take all the cars off the road. You would get rid of all power tools. There would be no such thing as a lathe. There wouldn't be a chainsaw. There wouldn't be any medicines because medicines have side effects. But we accept all of these risks. And then we ask the question, we say, given that these things can happen, ought we to ban the use of those things? And the answer is normally no. We make a cost-benefit analysis and we come out with an ought that's based on A, some moral code, and B, some perhaps a cost-benefit analysis. Now, my own moral code, the one I subscribe to, is the one that says that your highest purpose in life is to pursue your own happiness. And you do that by obtaining, through earning, honest means, rational means, the things that your life and happiness depend upon. So money and shelter and food and love and admiration, family, all of these things are values. These are what we call values. And values are the things that make it possible to live and possible for you to achieve happiness. If you just sit around, you don't do anything, you sit on a beach, you'll starve to death. You won't achieve any happiness. If you cheat in a foot race, they might stick the gold medal on your chest, but you're not going to feel very good about it because secretly you're going to know the only reason you're wearing it is because you're a cheater. So there are rational and honest ways to achieve things, and you need to achieve them in order to survive and to thrive. Now, if that is the moral code that is right for life, and it's certainly all around us, right? We work all day. What do? We buy the things that we need to survive, the things that make us happy. We pay for our children's schooling and university. We buy our spouse a ring, etc. We do these things because we think that we are, by doing that, pursuing our own happiness. When you give your spouse a ring or some jewelry or a trip to the islands, because, and maybe you're not even going, you're doing it because you're making your spouse happy, and that makes you happy. It's a personal value to you because that spouse is of value to you, and you want that spouse to be your spouse, to be the person you love, and you want them to be happy because it makes you happy. So we do these things selfishly because we derive happiness and survival from it. It's the reason why you don't take that money that you spent on, let's say, steak and give it all away to the children in Africa. It's the reason you went on a trip rather than saving the life of someone in China. We operate on the code of pursuing our own happiness rationally and honestly. Most of us do. And so that we can survive and achieve happiness in this life on this earth. That's the reality. Now, we might have a moral code that we learn perhaps from church. I mean, I was raised Catholic. For the first 2 decades of my life, I thought that the highest good in life was the model of Jesus dying on the cross for everybody. And most people still in society operate on that altruist morality. Okay? So you say, well, if it comes right down to it, my life or the life of a stranger, the right thing to do would be, the brave thing to do would be to die so that he could live. Now, most of us don't believe we would actually do that, do we? Most of us would not jump into the jaws of the shark to prevent a total stranger from being eaten by the jaws of the shark, or eaten by the shark, if we're being honest with ourselves. And that's because that code that we hold up so dearly is actually not a code consistent with living on this planet. In fact, if you read the Bible, you'll see that Jesus says, he who loves his life will lose it, and he who hates his life will win life everlasting. In other words, this earth, this happiness is not happiness. This is not where happiness is supposed to be. You're supposed to achieve happiness in an afterlife. This is supposed to be misery and loss and suffering and denial and sacrifice. That is the altruist good. That's the altruist moral code. Okay, so let's apply that to coronavirus, shall we? Politician stands up and he says, I know this all hurts, folks, but we've got to just stay with the plan. Everybody's shelter in place. And I'm sorry that I'm closing 9/10 of all the businesses in society. So sucks to be you, you're out of a job. And I know you might lose your home and maybe your family will fall apart, etc. But we've got to do this because if just one life is saved. All right? They are making with the coronavirus a leap. They're saying if the science is in, if the science tells you that you can save a life, then it's right to shut down the economy. You see the leap there? It's right to sacrifice if the numbers are what the numbers are. No, the numbers do not tell you that altruism, self-sacrifice is right. The numbers tell you what the numbers are. From there, you say, now, what is good in life? What is the code by which a person should live? Well, if you want to live on this planet and achieve happiness in this life, you can't do it by seeking life everlasting. You can't do it by giving away everything you have, lying in the streets starving, because that way someone else gets to live an extra day. That's not the way we actually conduct ourselves in this society. Those who enjoy this life anyway. Those who want to die, well, they'll commit suicide if they're honest with themselves. But the rest of us will either just feel guilty about all the enjoyment we're actually having, all the success we're achieving, and not sharing it with others or giving it to others, or we won't feel guilt because we'll realize that part of being a human being is being a thing that has to earn, produce, etc., the wealth upon which our survival and happiness depends. There is nothing wrong with being a human being as opposed to a sacrificial animal. And the sooner you get over that guilt, the sooner the politicians cannot tell you that you're evil, that you're wrong, to want to be out there in the park, enjoying the sun, etc. You are pursuing your own happiness. If you are susceptible to a disease, etc., then you might need to take special precautions. If you're particularly old, if you're suffering multiple comorbidities, as we've heard, you're more susceptible. But the vast majority of us will not suffer COVID-19 symptoms to any appreciable degree. Certainly not children, certainly not teens, certainly not people in their 20s, 30s, 40s. Those are statistical abnormalities. Overwhelmingly, this is hitting people in their 80s. People in the long-term care facilities constitute something like 77% of all the people who've died of this disease. So let's be honest here. It is the case that the politicians are not such saving you, but rather they're adopting this code that says we have to save, even if only one person is saved, you have to sacrifice. And if you won't do it voluntarily, we'll use law to sacrifice you. So a code that by its nature is suicidal when you choose to do it is homicidal when they choose to do it. In other words, you can choose all you like to not eat, to just give your food away, give your money away, and etc. That would ultimately be suicidal if you followed that with perfect integrity, right? If you always preferred giving food to someone else so that they won't die as opposed to you, give your job to someone else so that they won't have joblessness, etc. If you pursued that campaign with perfect integrity, you would be dead in very short order. You don't, which is why you feel guilty all the time because someone told you that was the right moral code. So just understand that when Doug Ford says you're a bunch of yahoos for going out and enjoying yourself in the sun, when he says you're a bunch of yahoos for daring to speak your mind, to protest, to assemble, as everyone has a right to do in a free society, what he's doing is saying that if the facts are in, then automatically his moral code is the right one. He doesn't get to make that decision. He doesn't speak about morality for all of you. Finally, third beef, very related. You'll notice how angry a person like the Premier of Ontario gets when people say, to heck with you, we're going to go out and protest. We're going to go out at Queen's Park and say that it's time to end the economic shutdown. Why is he getting angry? He's getting angry because he realizes that his decisions have shut down the economy, are doing harm. And he wanted everybody to just feel guilty about not helping the few people that can help. If you stay in place, supposedly, again, that's not even proven, but let's just say it's proven. He wants you to feel so guilty about being out that you won't question his decision to close down the economy. You see, he's counting on you feeling guilty. He's counting on you saying, you know what, if only one person is helped, then it's good for me to sacrifice everything I have. And when you go out there and you say, I want the economy open now, he calls you selfish and he tries to trash you. He tries to shame you because he's angry and worried that he doesn't have your guilt anymore. He can't use your guilt against you. You know, there's a line in a book by Ayn Rand called Atlas Shrugged. And a wife is manipulating her husband. He feels guilty. He doesn't love her anymore, but he feels duty bound. Well, he married her, so now he's just got to put up with it. And she knows it. She knows he'll just put up with it no matter what because his honor is on the line. And she uses that honor. She hangs it over his head all the time to manipulate him all of the time. Finally, he says, you know what? I'm sick of putting up with this. And she goes upset now that he's divorcing her. She goes to a friend and he says, oh, you're upset. You suddenly discovered that guilt is a rope that wears thin. That is what is angering the Premier of Ontario. When you go out there and protest and say, no, I'm not going to sacrifice. I'm going to enjoy the sun. I'm going to speak my mind and I want to get back to work. So take these police officers, put them back to work, getting the bad guys and stop having them fine us, bankrupt us. It's time to end the guilt. When you don't feel guilty, he has no power over you. Anyway, that's my message for today, folks. Take care. And if you are susceptible to the disease, take special measures. Stay in. You know, wear the gloves, clean your hands regularly, etc. Everyone should do it anyway, just in case. But that susceptibility, that immune deficiency you might have, just remember that doesn't give you any right to take away someone else's life or their liberty or their property. Take care.